The wind on the frontier moon of Virith did not just blow. It screamed. It tore through the jagged black mountains like a physical thing, carrying with it the metallic tang of exposed ore and the ozone bite of the electric green storm clouds that perpetually bruised the sky. Perched precariously on a basalt cliff overlooking the dragon's throat, a deep, mist-choked nesting valley, the Black Ridge skyport looked less like a sanctuary and more like a rusted skeleton clinging to the rock for dear life. Jax wiped a smear of hydraulic grease from his forehead, leaving a dark streak across his pale, scarred skin. At 32, he possessed the heavy, deliberate movements of a man who had seen too much and expected too little. He stood in Bay 4 of the repair deck, wrestling with the stabilizer fin of a battered ore hauler that looked as if it had gone 10 rounds with an asteroid field and lost every single one of them. "You are going to strip that bolt if you keep torquing it like a gorilla," a mechanical voice deadpanned from the floor. Jax looked down at the battered orange metal case sitting near his boot. It was a standard-issue military repair assistant, scrubbed of its serial numbers but retaining a personality glitch that made it insufferable. "If you had hands, Kit." "I would let you do it," Jax muttered, leaning his weight into the wrench. "Since you are a box, shut up and monitor the stress fracture." "I am detecting a spike in your cortisol levels," Kit replied, its sensor eye flickering blue. "And a 90% probability that you are going to regret not charging extra for this job. The miner cannot pay you." Jax ignored the AI and gave the bolt one final groaning turn until it locked into place. He knew the miner, a kid named Davin who was trying to feed a family back in the colony sector. Davin had offered a handful of raw crystalline shards that were barely worth the fuel it took to mine them. Jax had taken them anyway, nodding as if it were a fair trade. It was a bad business strategy, but Jax was not here to get rich. He was here to forget. He dropped the wrench into Kit's open compartment with a clang. The war had ended 5 years ago, or so the treaties said. But out here on the rim, the silence between humans and the Dracanari was heavy, filled with the static of unsaid things. Jax had fought in the mud of 3 different worlds, watching the sky burn as Dracanari dragon riders rained fire on human trenches. He had survived, which was its own kind of punishment. Now he fixed ships, drank terrible synthetic coffee, and tried to ignore the ache in his shoulder when the atmospheric pressure dropped. Jax walked to the edge of the open hangar bay, looking out at the storm brewing in the south. The clouds were a bruised purple, lit from within by spasms of green lightning. Local news feeds were already buzzing this morning. The holographic display in the break room had been flashing headlines about mysterious border skirmishes near the Calith sector. Human freighters destroyed, Dracanari patrols cited for airspace violations. It was all propaganda, the kind of noise that usually preceded the screaming of missiles. Everyone was blaming everyone else, and the truth was likely buried somewhere in the dark between the stars. "Incoming projectile," Kit announced, its tone bored. "Or perhaps a meteor. The trajectory is erratic." Jax frowned, looking at the radar screen mounted on the wall. A single blip was spiraling down from the upper atmosphere, moving way too fast for a standard approach. "That is not a meteor," Jax said, his stomach tightening with a familiar combat instinct. "That is a biosignature." He grabbed a pair of thermal binoculars and sprinted to the railing. Through the lenses, the storm clouds parted, violently shoved aside by a massive shape. It was a dragon, not the feral, smaller drakes that sometimes nested in the lower cliffs, but a true war mount. It was a behemoth of silver-blue scales, its wingspan wide enough to shadow a heavy freighter. But it was in trouble. The bioluminescent patterns along its flanks, usually a steady, rhythmic pulse, were flickering wildly. Spasmodic bursts of light that signaled critical exhaustion or neural failure. "It is coming in too hot," Jax yelled, though there was no one to hear him but the box. The dragon spiraled, one wing tucking in a chaotic tumble before snapping open again to catch the updraft. It was aiming for the main landing platform, a slab of reinforced duracrete jutting out over the abyss. Jax was already running. He slammed his hand against the emergency alarm, sending a harsh klaxon wail echoing through the empty bays. He didn't know why he was running toward it. He had spent years shooting at these things. But the pilot, he could see a small, dark shape clinging to the harness, was fighting for control with a desperation that twisted Jax's gut. The impact shook the fillings in Jax's teeth. The dragon slammed onto the platform, metal screeching as talons the size of scythes gouged deep furrows into the deck. The creature's momentum carried it forward, sliding amidst a shower of sparks and buckling plating. The beast roared, a sound like grinding tectonic plates, and one of its massive wings clipped the control tower, sending debris raining down. The rider was thrown. Jax saw the figure in black and gold armor tumble across the slick surface of the platform, rolling dangerously close to the edge where the safety rail had been sheared away. The drop was 2,000 feet straight down into the jagged darkness of the valley. Jax did not think. He did not consider the politics or the war or the fact that this was a Draconari. He just moved. He sprinted through the smoke and the blinding sparks of severed power cables, his boots hammering against the metal. The rider was sliding, scrabbling for a grip on the wet duracrete. One gloved hand went over the edge. Jax threw himself forward, sliding on his knees. He reached out, his fingers locking around the rider's forearm. The jolt nearly dislocated his shoulder. The rider swung out over the void, feet kicking at empty air. "Got you!" Jax roared over the wind. For a second, he looked down. The valley floor was a swallowed darkness, waiting. He looked at the rider. A hood obscured the face, but the arm he held was slender, encased in a flexible, high-grade armor weave that felt like spun steel. The dragon collapsed in a heap of heaving scales 20 feet away, let out a low, terrifying moan and shifted. Its massive wing, tattered and leaking glowing blue fluid, swept downward, creating a canopy over them, shielding them from the driving rain and the wind. Jax groaned, planting his boots against a piece of twisted wreckage, and heaved. The rider scrambled, finding purchase, and together they tumbled back onto the solid platform, away from the drop. They lay there for a moment, chests heaving, the air between them smelling of ozone and the distinct musk-like scent of the dragon like rain on hot stone. Jax sat up first, wiping rain from his eyes. "You have a hell of a landing protocol, pilot." The rider pushed up to a sitting position. The heavy traveler's cloak had fallen back. It was a woman, or rather, a female Draconari. She was striking in a way that made Jax's breath catch in his throat, a reaction he immediately resented. Her skin was a pale, dusting violet, smooth and flawless, contrasting sharply with the chaotic environment. But it was her eyes that pinned him, iridescent gold, framing vertical slit pupils that dilated and contracted rapidly as she assessed the threat. She did not look grateful. She looked like a cornered panther. She scrambled backward, her hand going instinctively to her hip, where a weapon would be, but the holster was empty. "Easy," Jax said, holding up his grease-stained hands, palms out. "I just pulled you off a ledge. I am not looking to throw you back off." The woman froze, her golden eyes narrowing. She took a breath, a sharp intake of air that seemed to center her, and the panic in her expression was instantly replaced by a mask of imperious calm. It was a terrifyingly fast transition. "My gratitude," she said. Her voice was husky, accented with the rolling vowels of the high Draconari tongue, though she spoke fluent human common. The storm. The storm was worse than the charts predicted. She stood up, her legs shaking slightly, but she locked her knees and forced stillness. She looked toward the dragon. Ethan! The massive beast let out a chuffing sound, its head resting heavily on the deck. Its eyes, massive orbs of liquid darkness, rolled toward her. Jack stood slowly, wary of the animal. That is a lot of lizard to park in a no-fly zone, he noted. You are lucky the automated turrets are offline for maintenance. I am not lucky, human, she snapped, though her eyes remained fixed on her mount. I am skilled. Luck is for those who do not plan. Jax almost laughed. She had just crashed a 5-ton predator into a mining station and nearly fallen to her death. Yet she stood there with her chin raised as if she owned the very air she was breathing. I am Jax, he said. I run this scrap heap. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Lyra. My name is Lyra. I am a courier, a storm scout. Jax looked at the dragon again. The bio-armor fused to the creature's scales was cracked in several places, leaking that glowing blue fluid. He had seen courier rigs before. They were light, efficient. This harness was heavy, ornate, and built for war. A courier, Jax repeated, his voice flat. Right, and I am the Emperor of the Moon. You need a medic. Lyra? You took a hard hit. No, she said quickly, stepping between him and the dragon. No medics. Your scanners are not calibrated for Draconari physiology. They register our metabolic baseline as a viral infection. I do not have time to be quarantined by idiot machines. Jax crossed his arms. The rain was soaking through his coveralls. Okay. No medics. But your beast there is bleeding coolant or blood or whatever you call it. And your harness is sheared. You are not flying out of here tonight. Lyra looked at the dragon, her mask slipping just enough to reveal a profound, aching worry. She reached out and touched the dragon's snout. The creature leaned into her palm, letting out a purr that vibrated through the deck plates. I need repairs, she said, not looking at Jax. Immediate repairs. And fuel. High-grade organic slurry if you have it. I can pay. She reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out a credit chip. It was heavy, black, and unmarked. There is 5,000 credits on this, she said. Untraceable. That should cover your silence and your services. Jax looked at the chip, then at her. 5,000 was enough to keep the skyport running for 6 months. It was an absurd amount of money for a courier. It was the kind of money people paid when they were running from something that could kill them. Jax took the chip. He didn't ask questions. In his experience, questions just led to holes in the chest. Pull him into Bay 4, Jax said, gesturing toward the cavernous opening. It is the only one big enough. And try not to knock over my toolbox. He is sensitive. Getting the dragon inside was an exercise in patience and terror. The creature, despite its injuries, moved with a fluid, predatory grace that made the hairs on the back of Jax's neck stand up. Lyra walked by its head, murmuring in that low, melodic language that sounded like wind moving through glass pipes. Jax watched her as he set up the hydraulic lifts. She was different from the Draconari soldiers he had fought. They had been jagged, hard edges and anger. She was precise. Every movement she made was calculated. She moved with a straight-backed elegance that seemed out of place in a grease-stained hangar. Once the dragon was settled on the grav pad, Jax brought over a welding torch and a canister of bio-sealant. I can patch the armor plates, Jax said, adjusting the flame until it hissed blue. But the biological components are on you. I fix ships, not biology. Lyra nodded. shedding her heavy cloak. Underneath, her armor was scuffed but clearly high quality. She began to strip the damaged sections of the harness away from the dragon's flank. Jax worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the hiss of the torch and the hum of the storm outside. He found himself watching her out of the corner of his eye. She was focused, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. But there was a tremor in her fingers that betrayed her exhaustion. "You flew through the ion wash, didn't you?" Jax asked suddenly. Lyra paused, looking up. Her golden eyes caught the light of the welding torch. The navigational buoys were down. She lied smoothly. "I had no choice." Jax snorted. "The buoys are never down. You flew through the wash because it scrambles tracking sensors. Who is chasing you? Lyra? Pirates? Slavers?" She went back to work, tightening a strap with fierce intensity. "I am a courier. Jax. Sometimes the cargo is time-sensitive. Sometimes the route is dangerous. Do not pretend you care. You took the credits. I took the credits because the roof leaks and my AI keeps threatening to unionize," Jax said, moving around the dragon's massive shoulder. "I am just saying, nobody flies through an ion wash unless they are desperate or crazy." "Perhaps I am both," she murmured. Kit rolled over on his treads, extending a sensor arm toward the dragon. "Warning. This biological entity has a caloric deficit and is shedding particulate matter on my sockets. It is unsanitary." Lyra looked down at the orange box, startled. "Does your tool always complain?" "Only when he is awake," Jax said. "Ignore him. Kit, hand me the hydro spanner." Kit ejected the tool with a pneumatic hiss, shooting it toward Jax's hand with slightly too much force. Jax caught it seamlessly. As Lyra worked on the dragon's flank, she sang softly. It was a haunting, rhythmic tune, barely more than a whisper. The dragon's breathing slowed, its flickering scales stabilizing into a steady, pulsing blue glow. "What are you doing?" Jax asked, pausing his work. "It is a binding song," Lyra said, not stopping. "It synchronizes our heart rates. It calms the pain. Draconari technology is not just metal and wire human. It is lived in." Jax watched her. He had spent years thinking of the Draconari as monsters who rode monsters. But watching her soothe the giant beast, seeing the tenderness in her hands, he felt a crack in his own armor. It was uncomfortable. He moved to help her release a jammed coupling near the dragon's neck. It was a two-person job. The locking mechanism was fused by the heat of the entry. "I have got the release pin," Jax said, leaning in close. "You pull the lever on 3. He could smell her properly now, a scent like crushed spices and ozone. She was warm, radiating a heat that was higher than a human's. 1, 2, 3. Jax yanked the pin while Lyra heaved on the lever. The metal groaned and gave way with a snap. Lyra lost her balance, stumbling backward. Jax reached out to steady her, his hand catching her waist, while her gloved hand instinctively grabbed his shoulder to stop her fall. For a moment, they were frozen. Her hand slipped from his shoulder and brushed against the bare skin of his neck. Jax felt it like an electric shock, not the static of the storm, but something deeper. A jolt that went straight to the base of his spine. He saw Lyra's pupils blow wide, consuming the gold iris until her eyes were almost black. She gasped, a small, sharp sound. It wasn't just surprise, it was recognition, a biological imperative that neither of them understood. Jax stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "The coupling is free." Lyra pulled her hand back as if she had been burned. She turned away, busying herself with the harness, but Jax saw her hand trembling. "Right," she said, her voice unusually high. "Good. That is good." Jax turned his attention to the harness piece he had removed. He turned it over in his hands, examining the underside. His eyes narrowed. Etched into the alloy, almost invisible beneath the scorch marks, was a seal, a stylized dragon coiled around a star. It was a quantum seal, the kind that didn't just lock a buckle, it locked genetic codes. He had seen diagrams of these during the war. This wasn't courier gear. This was Royal Guard tech, maybe even higher. He looked at Lyra's back. She was not a courier. She was highborn, maybe a noble's daughter running away from an arranged bonding, or a diplomat fleeing an assassination. "You have got some fancy hardware for a scout," Jax said, keeping his voice light. "That quantum seal is military grade. Actually, it is better than military." Lyra went rigid. She turned slowly, her face composed into a mask of bored amusement. "I told you, Jax, I carry valuable things. My employers provide the best equipment to ensure their property arrives intact." She walked over to him, reaching for the harness piece. She moved with a fluid confidence that was almost distracting. She took the metal from his hands, her fingers deliberately avoiding his skin this time. "Besides," she said, a playful glint entering her eyes, creating a distraction. "If you are so impressed by a simple lock, I worry about your skills as a mechanic. Can you not do better than Royal Engineers?" Jax blinked, caught off guard by the challenge. "I can fix anything with an engine, lady. I can make this bucket of bolts sing opera if I have enough time." "Then stop staring at the seal and fix the intake valve," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Unless you want me to tell your toolbox that you are slacking." Jax laughed, a rusty sound that felt strange in his throat. He hadn't laughed in a long time. "Yeah. Okay. Point taken." He went back to work, but the suspicion didn't leave him. It just settled deeper, right next to the curiosity. An hour later, the primary repairs were done. The dragon was sleeping, a low rumble that vibrated the floor plates. Jax was wiping his hands on a rag when he heard the sound of a transport skiff approaching outside. Lyra tensed immediately, shrinking back into the shadows of the dragon's wing. "Relax," Jax said quietly. "It is just the perimeter patrol. They don't come in unless I invite them." Lyra didn't relax. She moved silently toward the hangar office, slipping into the darkened doorway where she could see the landing pad without being seen. Jax watched her go, then busied himself with his tools. He could hear voices drifting in from the open bay doors. 2 dock guards were walking past, their heavy boots clanking on the metal. "Told you it is a waste of time," one guard was saying. "The manifest says agricultural equipment." "Yeah. Well, the captain says these plows shoot plasma," the second guard replied, laughing. "Just got a shipment in from the corporate authority. Massive crates, marked for border defense. You know what that means. It means they are expecting a fight with the scale skins," the first guard said. "About time. I heard the Draconari are massing near the nebula. If those new rifles can punch through dragon scale, let them come." Jax stopped wiping his hands. He stood very still. Plasma rifles. Illegal shipments. That wasn't just smuggling. That was an act of war. In the shadows of the office, Lyra stood frozen, her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew those crate markings. She had seen the falsified orders on her own council's data slate before she fled. Defense against Draconari raids. It was a lie. The raids were staged. Someone was moving weapons to the border to provoke a conflict, and her own people were being blamed for it. She noted the time and the guard's identification number in her memory. This was it. The proof she had been searching for. The conspiracy wasn't just a theory, it was sitting in a warehouse a few hundred meters away. She looked at Jax, who was staring out at the guards with a dark, unreadable expression. He wasn't like the others. He hadn't cheered at the thought of killing Draconari. He looked tired. When the guards moved on, Jax hit the button to close the heavy blast doors, sealing out the storm and the voices. Lyra stepped out of the shadows. She walked past Jax and climbed the spiral stairs to the high balcony that overlooked the hangar bay. She needed air, or as much air as this recycled atmosphere could provide. Jax watched her go, then turned to Kit. "Keep an eye on the sensors. Kit, if anyone comes within 50 meters, you wake me up. I will emit a high-frequency screech," Kit promised. "It will be very annoying." "Perfect." Jax climbed the stairs after her. He found her standing at the railing, looking down at the sleeping dragon, her arms wrapped around herself. The wind from the ventilation fan stirred her dark hair. From this angle, she looked small. The imperious queen he had glimpsed earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked incredibly lonely. Lyra stared at the dragon, her mind racing back to the Crystal Palace on the homeworld. She could see the faces of the council, cold ancient men and women who viewed her not as a person but as a breeding stock and a figurehead. "You must marry Lord Varanth," they had said, "to secure the lineage, to ensure stability." They wanted a puppet. They wanted her to sit on the sun throne and smile while they engineered a war that would make them rich and powerful. She looked at her hands. Out here, covered in grease and soot, she was nobody. Just Lyra. And for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen her. Not the crown, not the title, just a woman who had crashed a dragon. Jax helped her. He had saved her life, risking his own skin, and he didn't even know her last name. She heard his boots on the metal grating. She didn't turn around. "Your beast is stable," Jax said, leaning against the doorframe. "The armor is holding. You can leave in the morning when the storm breaks." Lyra turned to face him, the harsh halogen lights of the hangar reflected in her golden eyes. "Thank you, Jax," she said. It wasn't the formal gratitude of a queen. It was soft, raw, and sincere. Jax shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked uncomfortable with the emotion. "Don't mention it. Just try not to fall off any more cliffs. It is bad for my insurance premiums." He offered a lopsided, crooked smile. It changed his face, taking 10 years off the hardness around his eyes. Lyra felt that dangerous warmth again, the one that had sparked when his skin touched hers. It was terrifying. It was the most real thing she had felt in years. She looked at him, really looked at him. The scars on his hands, the grease on his face, the quiet strength in his posture. "I will try," she said softly. Jax held her gaze for a second too long. The air between them felt charged, heavy with the things they weren't saying. He nodded once, then turned and walked back down the stairs, leaving her alone with the hum of the dragon and the storm raging outside. Lyra turned back to the dark valley. She had found a safe harbor, but she knew it couldn't last. The war was coming, and she was the only one who could stop it. But for tonight, just for tonight, she wasn't Queen Lyralis. She was just the pilot who had been caught by a human mechanic with sad eyes and gentle hands. The morning sun on Vireth was a harsh, pale thing that struggled to pierce the sulphurous haze of the upper atmosphere. It cast long, sickly shadows across the landing deck of the Black Ridge skyport, illuminating the jagged scars in the metal where Ethan had crashed the night before. Jax stood near the open bay doors, a mug of lukewarm synthetic coffee in his hand, watching the approach of a heavy transport shuttle. It was sleek, painted in matte charcoal, and bore the insignia of the Interstellar Trade Authority, a stylized gear clenched in a hawk's talon. He knew that logo. He had seen it stamped on the side of crates that were supposedly full of agricultural machinery but weighed enough to be packed with depleted uranium. "Here comes the welcoming committee," Jax muttered into his cup. "Kit, the orange repair bot, word beside his boot. My sensors indicate a 99% probability that these individuals are not here to discuss the weather. Their weapons are charged. Go hide in the office, Kit," Jax said, setting his mug down on a tool bench. "And power down your personality matrix, if they decide to impound anything. I do not need you insulting their mothers." The shuttle touched down with a heavy thud, its engines whining as they cycled down. The ramp hissed open, and a squad of 6 security officers marched out. They wore corporate tactical armor, clean, expensive, and intimidating. Leading them was a man with a thin, sharp face and hair gelled so severely it looked like a helmet. Jax wiped his hands on a rag and walked out to meet them, affecting the slouched, unthreatening posture of a mechanic who was hungover and underpaid. "Morning," Jax called out, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "If you are looking for fuel, the pumps are dry until the supply runner comes in on Tuesday." The lead officer stopped 10 feet away. He looked at Jax with the kind of disdain usually reserved for insects. "I am Commander Voss, Corporate Security," the man said. His voice was smooth, oily. "We are conducting a routine safety compliance inspection. There have been reports of unauthorized airspace incursions in this sector." Jack scratched his chin, feigning confusion. "Is that right? The storm scrambled my long-range sensors. I haven't seen anything but rocks and rain." Voss's eyes flicked past Jack's, toward the darkened maw of Bay 4. "And yet, I detect a massive biothermal signature in your repair bay. A Draconari mount, unless I am mistaken." Jax felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The officer's insignia was identical to the one on the illegal weapon crates Jax had been paid to ignore 2 days ago. This wasn't a random inspection. They were cleaning up loose ends. "It is a courier," Jax said easily. "Came in hot last night with a busted wing. Pilot paid cash. I do not ask questions. Commander, that is Skyport policy. We will see about that," Voss said, signaling his men. "Secure the perimeter. I want a full scan of the creature and the pilot. If there is any contraband, or if the beast is carrying unlicensed weaponry, we liquidate it." Jack stepped into Voss's path. It was a subtle move, just a shift of weight, but it halted the commander's advance. "Whoa, hold on," Jack said, keeping his voice light but firm. "That dragon is injured and unstable. You go pointing high-frequency scanners at it. It is going to panic. And a panicked dragon in an enclosed space turns into a blender. I do not want to scrape your expensive armor off my walls," Voss sneered, his hand dropping to the stun baton at his belt. "Step aside, mechanic, or you will be charged with obstruction." Before Jax could reply, a voice rang out from the shadows of the bay. "Let them pass." "Jax!" Lyra stepped into the light. She had cleaned the soot from her face and armor, and though she still wore the travel-stained cloak, she wore it like a royal robe. Her golden eyes burned with a cold, terrifying intensity as she looked at Voss. Voss paused, his eyes narrowing as he took in her appearance. The Draconari. Step away from the beast. Lyra stood her ground, her hand resting on the hilt of a knife she had scavenged from Jax's workshop. "I am a free citizen of the Reach," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You have no jurisdiction to search my mount without a warrant from the Colonial Marshal." Voss laughed, a dry, barking sound. Out here, the corporation is the law. Scan it. Two of the guards moved forward, raising handheld bioscanners. They were aggressive, thrusting the devices toward Ethan's head. The scanners emitted a high-pitched whine that was barely audible to human ears but must have sounded like a scream to the dragon. Ethan roared. It was a sound that vibrated in the marrow of Jax's bones. The massive blue dragon surged up from the floor, its scales flaring with blinding white light. Its tail whipped around, smashing a stack of fuel drums against the far wall with a deafening crash. The guards panicked, raising their rifles. "No!" Lyra screamed, throwing herself toward the dragon's head to calm it. But the beast was thrashing, blinded by the sonic assault. Voss drew his sidearm. "Put it down." Jax moved. He didn't think about the politics. He didn't think about the fact that he was unarmed against 6 corporate soldiers. He slipped into the combat rhythm he had tried so hard to forget. He pivoted, grabbing the barrel of the nearest guard's rifle and shoving it upward just as the man pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt scorched the ceiling. In the same motion, Jax grabbed the scanner from the guard's other hand. "You are hurting it!" Jax yelled, pitching his voice to sound like a frantic civilian rather than a soldier. "The frequency is feedback looping. Look!" He jammed his thumb into the scanner's access port, crushing the delicate sensor array with a practiced twist of his wrist. He held the screen up to Voss. It was flashing erratic, nonsensical red patterns. "See?" Jax shouted over the dragon's roaring. "Your gear is malfunctioning. It is reading the magnetic ore in the floor plates as a threat. You are going to get us all killed because your equipment is junk." Voss hesitated. The dragon was snapping its jaws inches from his men, held back only by Lyra's desperate soothing words in the Draconari tongue. The chaos, combined with Jax's frantic conviction, broke the officer's confidence. "Call them off," Jax yelled, throwing the broken scanner at Voss's feet. "Unless you want to explain to your superiors why you lost a squad to a courier's pet." Voss looked at the snarling dragon, then at the sparking mess of his scanner. He sneered, holstering his weapon. "Pull back," he ordered, his voice tight with anger. "This place is a hazard." The guards retreated, looking relieved. Voss glared at Jax, his eyes cold and promising violence. "We are done here for now," Voss hissed, "but I am flagging this port for a full audit. If I find 1 credit out of place mechanic, I will burn this rust bucket to the ground." "Get off my deck," Jax said, his voice low and devoid of humor. Voss spun on his heel and marched his team back to the shuttle. Jax didn't move until the ramp closed and the engines flared, lifting the ship into the gray sky. Only then did he let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 10 years. He turned to look at Lyra. She was leaning against Ethan's flank, her hand stroking the dragon's neck, but her eyes were fixed on Jax. She looked shocked. "You," she said, her voice quiet, "you broke the scanner." Jax shrugged, picking up his coffee mug. His hand was shaking slightly. It was a cheap model, easy to confuse. "You risked your life," Lyra said, stepping away from the dragon. She walked toward him, stopping only a foot away. "Those men would have killed you. Why?" Jax looked at her. He saw the confusion in her golden eyes, but beneath it, he saw something else. A spark, a hunger. It was the look of someone who had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who wanted things from her. Finally meeting someone who just wanted her to be safe. "I do not like bullies," Jax said gruffly. "And I do not like people shooting up my workshop. It is bad for business." Lyra studied his face, searching for the lie, but found only a stubborn, weary honesty. A warmth spread through her chest, dangerous and intoxicating. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the sudden, terrifying realization that she trusted him. "They are running weapons," Lyra said abruptly. Jax blinked. What? Voss? The officer. His insignia matches the crates I saw yesterday, Lyra said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I am not just a courier, Jax. I am an investigator for a high-ranking Draconari family. We have been tracking a smuggling ring that is trying to provoke a war. Jax sighed, rubbing his temples. Of course you are. And let me guess. Those weapons are not going to a shooting range. They are going to the border, Lyra said. To arm extremists. If they succeed, the peace treaty will shatter. Thousands will die. Jax looked out at the storm. He remembered the mud. He remembered the smell of burning ozone and the weight of a rifle in his hands. He had sworn he was done. I am a mechanic, Lyra, Jax said softly. I fix things that are broken. I do not fight wars. Not anymore. Lyra reached out, her hand hovering over his arm before she pulled it back. I am not asking you to fight a war. I am asking you to help me stop one. I need to track that shipment. I need to know who is receiving it on the Draconari side. I can fly, but I do not know the human smuggling routes. You do. Jax looked at her. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell her to take her dragon and her dangerous eyes and leave, but he looked at the bruise forming on her cheek from the crash, and he remembered the way she had stood between him and the dragon. I am expensive, Jax said finally. Lyra smiled, a small, genuine thing that lit up the gloom of the hangar. I have more credits, she said. I do not want credits. Jax grunted, turning to grab his tool belt. I want answers. When this is over, you tell me the truth, all of it. No more vague stories about noble families. Lyra's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she nodded. Deal. Getting out of the skyport was not graceful. Jax stood on the landing platform, staring up at the saddle strapped to Ethan's back. It looked impossibly high and alarmingly insecure. You want me to sit where? Jax asked. Behind me, Lyra said, swinging herself up with practiced ease. She extended a hand down to him. Lock your arms around my waist and do not let go. Jax took her hand and hauled himself up. The dragon felt warm and solid beneath him, shifting like a living earthquake. He settled into the space behind the saddle, feeling exposed and ridiculous. I prefer ships, Jax muttered, gripping the leather straps until his knuckles turned white. Ships have walls. Ships do not have opinions. Ethan turned his massive head, fixing Jax with one giant, unblinking eye. The dragon snorted, a blast of hot air that smelled of sulfur, and deliberately flicked his tail, jolting Jax forward so that he slammed into Lyra's back. Jax yelped. He did that on purpose. Lyra laughed. It was a clear, bell-like sound that seemed to startle even her. He likes you, she said, glancing over her shoulder. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright. If he didn't, he would have eaten you by now. Hold on, she whistled, a sharp, piercing note. Ethan launched himself off the cliff. The world dropped away. Jax's stomach went into his throat. For a second they were falling, plummeting toward the jagged rocks of the valley floor. Then, the massive wings snapped open with a sound like a thunderclap. The sudden lift slammed Jax against Lyra, his arms instinctively wrapping tight around her waist. They soared upward, banking hard into the wind. The sensation was raw and violent, the wind tearing at their clothes, the muscles of the dragon surging beneath them. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. Where are we going? Jax yelled over the wind. To the Deadlands, Lyra shouted back. That is where the scanner indicated the shipment was headed. They flew for an hour, weaving through the towering cloud formations. The storm had broken into scattered squalls, and the sunlight piercing through created majestic cathedrals of light and shadow. Jax found himself relaxing, just slightly. The heat of Lyra's body against his was a constant anchor. She smelled of rain and that strange, spicy scent. He realized with a jolt of panic that he didn't want to let go. Warning. Jax's headset crackled. It was Kit, who Jax had insisted on strapping into a cargo pouch on the saddle, picking up multiple fast-moving bogies. 6 o'clock high. Jax twisted around. 3 black specks were diving out of the sun. As they got closer, he saw the glint of chrome and the red glow of optical sensors. "Drones!" Jax yelled. "Combat models!" Lyra cursed in her own language. They must have tracked the dragon's biosignature. The drones opened fire. Streaks of red energy sizzled through the air, burning ozone trails past Ethon's wings. The dragon roared, banking into a steep dive that left Jax's stomach 3,000 feet above them. "I cannot outrun them," Lyra shouted. "They are too fast. They are testing anti-dragon tech," Jax realized. "Those targeting algorithms are predicting your movements." Jax reached into his pocket and pulled out a ruggedized datapad. "Keep flying evasive. I am going to try to jam them." Lyra pulled the dragon into a corkscrew maneuver, spinning through a narrow gap between 2 stone spires. The G-force pressed Jax down, making it hard to breathe, let alone type. A laser blast clipped Ethan's tail. The dragon shrieked, shuddering in midair. Jax gritted his teeth, his fingers flying across the datapad. He scanned for the control frequency of the drones. It was encrypted, a shifting military-grade cipher. "I need them closer," Jax yelled. "The signal is too weak. Are you insane?" Lyra screamed, rolling the dragon upside down to avoid a missile lock. "Just do it." Lyra didn't argue. She pulled up, stalling the dragon in midair, presenting a stationary target. The drones swarmed in, sensing the kill. Jax waited. He watched the signal strength bar climb on his screen. "Come on, come on." The lead drone swooped in, its weapon charging. "Now!" Jax hit the execute command. He didn't try to break the encryption, he just flooded their sensors with a feedback loop of garbage data, specifically a massive burst of static noise he had recorded from the ion storm. The drones faltered. Their formation broke. 2 of them collided in midair, exploding in a ball of fire. The third spun out of control, slamming into the canyon wall. "Got them!" Jax shouted, pumping his fist. Lyra didn't celebrate. "We are losing altitude. The stabilizer fin on the harness is damaged." She wrestled with the reins, guiding the struggling dragon down toward a deep chasm that glowed with a strange, ethereal light. "Hold on. Jax, this is going to be rough." They hit the ground hard, sliding across a bed of moss and gravel before coming to a halt near a rushing underground river. Silence fell over the canyon. It was a deep, resonant silence, broken only by the sound of water and the heavy breathing of the dragon. They had crashed in a place that looked like the inside of a geode. The walls of the canyon were lined with massive crystalline plants that glowed with a soft, bioluminescent violet light. It was hauntingly beautiful. Jax groaned, unbuckling himself from the saddle. He slid to the ground, his legs feeling like jelly. "Everyone okay?" he asked, patting himself down for broken bones. Lyra was already checking Ethan. She looked pale, her hair coming loose from its braid. "He is hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "A surface burn on the wing. It will heal, but he needs rest." She turned to Jax. You hacked military drones with a mechanic's datapad." Jax shrugged, wincing as he stretched his back. "I told you, I fix things. Sometimes that means breaking other things." They set up a makeshift camp under the shelter of a giant, glowing fern. Jax built a small fire while Lyra tended to the dragon. The air here was warm and humid, filled with floating spores that drifted like tiny stars. Later, they sat by the fire, eating ration bars that tasted like cardboard and vitamins. "So," Jack said, breaking the silence, "a noble family investigator. Do they teach you combat flying at finishing school?" Lyra looked into the fire. Her face was guarded. "I was raised to lead. And to lead, one must know how to fight. My father insisted on it." Jax nodded. "My dad insisted on me learning how to fix tractors. Then the war started, and the recruiters insisted I learn how to fix tanks. Then they insisted I learn how to shoot people." Lyra looked at him. "You were a soldier." Jax looked away, his expression darkening. "Everyone was a soldier. Lyra. Some of us just didn't get a choice. I spent 3 years in the mud on Helios Prime. I saw things that would make your dragon verify its insurance policy." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "I swore I was done with it, done with orders, done with causes. And yet, here you are," Lyra said softly, "helping a stranger fight a conspiracy." Jax looked at her. The firelight caught the gold in her eyes, making them burn. "You are not a stranger," he said. "Not anymore." The air between them shifted. It became thick, charged with that same electricity they had felt in the hangar. Lyra stood up and walked over to him. "You are hurt," she said, pointing to his shoulder. "The crash. Your harness dug in." Jax touched his shoulder. He winced. "It is fine. Let me see." She didn't wait for permission. She knelt beside him and gently peeled back the collar of his flight suit. Underneath, the skin was bruised, but what caught her attention were the old scars, jagged white lines crisscrossing his back and shoulder. Shrapnel wounds. Jax flinched, pulling away. "Don't. It is ugly." Lyra caught his hand. Her touch was cool, firm. "No," she said fiercely. "It is not ugly." She traced one of the scars with her thumb. Her touch was a feather-light ghost against his rough skin. "In my culture," she whispered, "we do not hide our scars. We gild them. They are proof that the universe tried to break you and you refused to break. They are proof that you survive." Jax looked at her. He felt exposed in a way he never had before. He saw the way she looked at him, not with pity but with reverence. "Lyra." He breathed. She leaned in. The distance between them closed. He could feel her breath on his lips. He could smell the storm and the spices, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to pull her close and forget the war and the weapons and the lies. Lyra's eyes flickered to his lips. Her eyelids fluttered shut. Then, she stopped. She pulled back, gasping as if surfacing from deep water. She scrambled to her feet, turning her back to him. I cannot," she said, her voice shaking. Jack stayed seated, his hands still hovering in the air where she had been. He understood, or he thought he did. She was a noble, he was a grease monkey. There were lines. "I know," Jack said, his voice rough. "I know. Get some sleep. Lyra." We move out at dawn. The next day was a blur of travel. They followed the encrypted signal Jax had pulled from the drone's memory core. It led them out of the canyon and across a desolate salt flat to a hidden ravine. There, they found it. A convoy of hover trucks was parked in the shadow of the cliffs. They were painted white, marked with the red crescent of the Interstellar Aid Organization, humanitarian relief. But when Jax and Lyra crept close, peering through thermal binoculars, they didn't see food or medicine. They saw men in corporate armor loading crates onto a Draconari shuttle. Jax scanned the crates with his data pad. "It is them," Jax whispered. Plasma rifles, disguised as grain shipments. Lyra was staring at the Draconari shuttle. It bore the crest of House Varanth, a serpent eating its own tail. "Varanth," she hissed. "Of course." Jax looked at her. "Who is Varanth?" "A counselor," she said, her voice cold as ice. "A man who claims to want peace but profits from fear. He is working with the humans." Jax tapped his data pad. "I am intercepting their comms. Listen to this." A voice crackled over the speaker. "Phase 2 is authorized. The attack on the border outpost will commence at midnight. Make it look like a Draconari raid." "It is a false flag," Jax said grimly. "They are going to attack their own people to justify a war." Lyra's face hardened. She pulled a small, intricate device from her belt. It was a royal communicator, capable of quantum-entangled transmission. "What are you doing?" Jax asked. "I am sending a report," she said, to my family. "They have the power to stop this. If I send them this evidence, they will intervene." She typed a furious message, attaching the data Jax had gathered and the video feed of the convoy. She sealed it with her biometric print, a thumb press that glowed gold, and hit send. They waited. The minutes stretched out, agonizingly slow. Finally, the device chimed. A reply. Lyra looked at the screen, all the color drained from her face. "What does it say?" Jax asked, moving closer. Lyra read the message aloud, her voice hollow. "Report received. Operative Lyra is ordered to cease investigation immediately. Return to base for debriefing. Do not engage. Do not speak of this to anyone." She looked up at Jax, her eyes wide with horror. "No outrage," she whispered. "No extraction team." "They know, Jax. They already know." Jax realized the implication instantly. The conspiracy didn't stop with Varanth. It went higher. "They are not going to help us," Jax said quietly. Lyra dropped the communicator. It clattered on the rocks. She looked devastated, like the ground had been cut out from under her. "I am alone," she said. Jax reached out and took her hand. He squeezed it hard. "No," he said firmly. "You are not alone. You have got me. And you have got a dragon with a bad attitude." Lyra looked at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. She squeezed his hand back, clinging to him like a lifeline. That night, they camped on a high ridge overlooking the storm sea, a vast ocean of churning liquid methane that raged beneath the cliffs. The wind howled, but in the lee of the rocks, it was quiet. Jax was asleep, curled up near Ethan's flank for warmth. His face was relaxed in sleep, the lines of worry smoothed out. Lyra sat awake, watching him. She thought about the council. She thought about the lies she had been told her whole life, that humans were savages, that her royal blood made her superior, that her duty was to the crown above all else. She looked at Jax, a human who had broken a scanner to save her dragon, a soldier who hated war but fought for her, a man who had looked at her scars and called them beautiful. She realized, with a clarity that cut through the confusion, that she didn't care about the crown anymore. She didn't care about the politics. She reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I trust you," she whispered into the dark, and for a queen who had spent her life surrounded by spies, that was the most dangerous confession of all. The flight to Calith was a journey through a dreamscape that felt too beautiful to be real. After the jagged, hostile mountains of Virith, the Draconari border world seemed to be sculpted from light and ambition. The atmosphere here was thick and golden, the clouds roiling in slow, majestic currents rather than violent storms. Jax sat behind Lyra on the saddle, his hands gripping the leather straps until his fingers ached. He had spent the last few hours processing the fact that the woman he was holding on to, the woman whose hair whipped against his face, was an investigator for a noble house. That had been hard enough to swallow. He was a mechanic who fixed rusted thrusters. She was highborn, someone who lived in towers he would never be allowed to enter. But as the clouds parted, revealing the surface of Calith, even that worry faded into awe. The landscape below was a tapestry of obsidian plains crisscrossed by rivers of slow-moving, glowing lava. Rising from this harsh beauty were the dragon towers, spires of living stone that pierced the cloud layer, spiraling upward like crystallized smoke, anchored by gravity-defying tethers. Massive floating palaces drifted lazily in the upper currents, their foundations encrusted with bioluminescent moss that dripped light like rain. "It is." Jack started, then cleared his throat, his voice rough. "It is a lot cleaner than the mining colony." Lyra did not answer. Her posture had changed. Since they crossed the atmospheric threshold, her back had straightened. The tension in her shoulders was not fear anymore. It was the rigid, steel-spine tension of someone preparing for a fight they knew they could not avoid. A shrill alarm blared from Jax's datapad, shattering the moment. "What is that?" Jax shouted over the wind. "My transponder," Lyra called back, her voice tight. "I just reactivated my official codes." Jax looked at the screen. It was flashing red. Warning. Royal Defense Grid initiated. Target locked. Jax's heart slammed into his rib. "Target locked?" "Lyra, we are being painted by fire control. You triggered the perimeter defenses." He reached for the jamming unit he had used on the drones, but Lyra's hand shot back, gripping his wrist with bruising force. "Do not jam it," she ordered. "They are going to shoot us down," Jax yelled, pointing ahead. From the cloud banks surrounding the central spire, shapes were emerging, and they were dragons, but not battered transports like Ethan. These were war mounts, sleek and covered in polished gold armor. There were 12 of them, flying in a perfect wedge formation that screamed discipline and lethality. They banked hard, intercepting Ethan's trajectory, flanking them on both sides. Jax instinctively reached for his sidearm, a useless gesture against 12 tons of armored reptile. "Lyra, evasive maneuvers." "No," Lyra said. She sounded calm, but it was a terrifying, hollow kind of calm. The lead dragon, a massive beast with scales the color of blood, roared, a sound that shook the air in Jax's lungs, but it did not attack. Instead, it dipped its wing, and its rider, a warrior in full ceremonial plate, raised a lance in a salute. Jax froze. He looked at the escort, then at the back of Lyra's head. The pieces clicked together in his mind. The royal-grade quantum seal on her harness, the way she commanded the guards at the skyport, the way she carried herself not just with confidence, but with the absolute certainty of authority. "They are not attacking," Jax said, his voice dropping to a whisper that the wind nearly stole. "They are an honor guard." Lyra took a deep breath. She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see her profile. Her jaw was set, her eyes staring straight ahead at the approaching palace. "I told you I was investigating for a high-ranking family," she said. Jax stared at her. "You said you were a courier, then an investigator. I am Lyralis," she said. The name hit Jax like a physical blow. He knew that name. Everyone knew that name. It was stamped on the treaties. It was whispered in the news feeds. It was the name of the sovereign ruler of the Draconari Reach. "Queen Lyralis," Jax corrected, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I am sorry," she said. She turned back to face the wind, leaving Jax alone with the crushing realization of just how high he had climbed, and how far he was about to fall. He wasn't just out of his depth. He was in a different universe, He had flirted with, argued with, and nearly kissed the head of state of an alien superpower. He felt foolish. He felt small. And then, burning hot and bright beneath the shame, he felt angry. The landing was a spectacle designed to intimidate. They touched down on the grand area of the central palace, a vast circular platform of polished white stone suspended thousands of feet above the lava plains. The wind here was gentle, filtered by energy shields, carrying the scent of exotic flowers and burning incense. As Ethan landed, his claws clicking on the pristine stone, the 12 escort dragons landed in a circle around them, bowing their heads in unison. Jax slid off the saddle, his legs stiff. He felt dirty. His flight suit was stained with grease and soot from the canyon crash. His boots were scuffed. He looked exactly what he was, a mechanic from a mining moon. Around them, a crowd had gathered. Draconari nobles in shimmering robes of silk and light weave stood in silent rows. Soldiers in gold armor stood at attention. Trumpets sounded, a deep, resonant blast that echoed off the spires. Lyra dismounted. She didn't stumble this time. She moved with a fluid grace, shedding the heavy traveler's cloak to reveal her battered armor. Even covered in dust, she looked regal. A tall Draconari male with silver hair and robes that looked like they cost more than Jax's entire life earnings stepped forward. He bowed low, but his eyes remained sharp, calculating. "Your Majesty," the man said. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. We had feared the worst. The council was preparing to declare a state of emergency. Lyra looked at him. Her expression was imperious, cold. "I am sure you were, Lord Varanth," she said, "though I suspect some fears were more hopeful than others." Varanth's smile didn't waver. He looked past her, his gaze landing on Jax. He looked at the human as if Jax were a smudge of dirt on a masterpiece. "And you have brought a guest," Varanth noted. "A human. Unauthorized, I presume. He is under my protection." Lyra snapped. "He saved my life." Varanth raised an eyebrow. A mechanic saving a queen. How poetic, and how politically complicated. "Security. Escort the human to the guest quarters. Keep him comfortable and contained." 2 guards stepped forward. Jax didn't look at them. He looked at Lyra. He wanted her to stop them. He wanted her to look at him and acknowledge that they were partners, that they had flown through hell together. Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes filled with a desperate, silent plea for understanding. But she didn't stop the guards. She couldn't. She was Queen Lyralis now, and queens did not interfere with protocol in front of the court. "Go with them, Jax," she said softly. "Please." Jax looked at her for a long second. Then he turned his back on her. "Fine," Jax said to the guards. "Lead the way. I could use a shower anyway." He walked away, surrounded by gold armor, without looking back. The political machinery of the Draconari court was a meat grinder, and Lyra had just stepped into the blades. An hour later, she stood in the center of the council chamber. It was a room of intimidating beauty, with walls of transparent crystal looking out over the burning plains below. The 12 members of the High Council sat on raised dais, looking down at her. "I have evidence," Lyra said, her voice ringing clear. "I have sensor logs, intercepted communications, and visual confirmation. The weapons moving to the border are not Draconari. They are corporate stock, paid for by a coalition that includes members of this very government." She threw the data crystal Jax had decrypted onto the central table. It clattered loudly in the silence. "This is a conspiracy to manufacture a war," Lyra continued. "And I know you, Lord Varanth, are at the center of it." Varanth sat in the center seat. He picked up the crystal, examining it with bored indifference. A serious accusation, Your Majesty, Varenth said. Based on data retrieved by a human mercenary and a queen who abandoned her throne to play scout in the mud. I did not abandon my throne, Lyra said, her hands clenching into fists. I went to find the truth because you were feeding me lies. We were protecting you, Varenth roared, his voice suddenly losing its oily veneer. You are young, Lyralis. You are idealistic. You think peace is maintained by holding hands? Peace is maintained by strength, by dominance. He stood up, pacing the dais. The humans are encroaching on our territory, he said, addressing the other counselors. They mine our moons. They pollute our skies. This war is inevitable. The only question is whether we strike first or wait to be bled dry. That is not your decision to make, Lyra said. I am the queen. Are you? Varenth asked softly. The room went deadly silent. You disappear for weeks. You return with a human lover in tow. Do not look shocked. Lyralis, we have eyes everywhere. You bring a frantic, unverified story about conspiracies. To the people, this does not look like leadership. It looks like instability. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a sympathetic purr. However, there is a solution, a way to restore confidence in your rule. Lyra narrowed her eyes. What solution? Marriage, Varenth said. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. General Kalen of the Iron Wing has long sought an alliance, Varenth continued. He controls the largest military faction. A union between you would cement the loyalty of the army and silence any whispers about your judgment. It would present a united front against the human threat. You want to sell me, Lyra whispered. To a warlord. I want to save the kingdom, Varenth corrected. The wedding can be arranged within the week, just in time to announce the mobilization for the war. I will never agree to that, Lyra said. Varenth smiled. It was a cold, reptile smile. I am afraid, Your Majesty, that given the current crisis, the Council has invoked the Emergency Stability Act. Your consent is a formality. The announcement has already been drafted. Jax's guest quarters were nicer than any apartment he had ever owned, which only made him hate it more. The walls were silk, the floors were heated stone, and the view of the lava fields was spectacular. But the door was locked, and the windows were reinforced with force fields. He was pacing the room like a caged tiger. They had taken his tools, and they had taken his datapad. They had even taken Kit, claiming the AI needed to be scanned for spyware. He was alone with his thoughts, and his thoughts were eating him alive. She was a queen. He replayed every interaction they had, the way she had teased him about the repair, the way she had looked at his scars, the way she had almost kissed him in the canyon. It all felt like a joke now, a royal holiday. The queen goes slumming with the mechanic to see how the peasants live. The door hissed open. Jax spun around, ready to fight a guard. It was Lyra. She had changed out of her armor. She was wearing a gown of deep blue shifting fabric that looked like water, draped with chains of gold. A crown of woven crystal sat on her brow. She looked breathtaking. She looked like a stranger. Jax, she said, stepping into the room. The door slid shut behind her. Jax didn't bow. He didn't smile. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. Your Majesty, he said, the title dripping with sarcasm. Come to inspect the prisoner? Or did you just need someone to polish your crown? Lyra flinched. She walked toward him, her hands reaching out, but she stopped when she saw the look in his eyes. I am sorry about the guards, she said. I had no choice. Varenth was watching. You are the queen, Jax said. You are the law. You have plenty of choices. You just chose the one that made you look good in front of your shiny friends. That is not fair, Lyra said, her voice rising. You do not understand the politics here. I am walking on a knife's edge. Varanth is trying to take my throne. He is trying to force me to marry a warlord. Jax laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Oh, poor you, forced to marry a general in a floating palace. Excuse me if I do not weep. My friends died in the mud. Lyra, real people are going to die because of this war you're playing at. I am trying to stop the war. Lyra shouted, that is why I went to Vareth. That is why I trusted you. You used me, Jax yelled back, pushing off the wall. He stepped into her space, his anger overcoming his fear. You lied to me from the second we met. I risked my life for a courier. I hacked drones for a scout. I bled for you, Lyra. And the whole time, you were just observing, taking notes. Was I just a fun little experiment? Something to pass the time before you went back to your silk sheets? No, Lyra cried. She looked furious, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. I lied to survive. And then I kept lying because for the first time in my life, someone was looking at me without seeing a title. She poked him in the chest, hard. You think this crown is a gift? It is a cage. Everyone I have ever met wants something from me. Power, influence, legitimacy. But you just wanted me to be safe. You made fun of me. You argued with me. You treated me like a person. She was crying now, the tears spilling over her violet cheeks. I did not know how to tell you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I was terrified that the moment I said the words, you would look at me the way you are looking at me right now, like I am a monster, like I am the enemy. Jax stared at her. He saw the gown and the crown, but beneath it, he saw the same woman who had helped him fix a dragon wing in a storm. He saw the fear and the loneliness that matched his own. He realized then that he wasn't angry because she was a queen. He was angry because he had fallen for her, and he thought he wasn't allowed to. You are not the enemy, Jax said, his voice rough. You are just way out of my league. Lyra let out a wet, shaky laugh. I do not care about leagues. I care about you. She looked up at him, her golden eyes wide and searching. I am going to lose everything? Jax, the council is moving against me. They are going to force this marriage. I might not be queen tomorrow. And the only thing I can think about is that I almost kissed you in the canyon, and I was too much of a coward to do it. Jax looked at her. The distance between them was inches. The air in the room felt suddenly hot, electric. He looked at the crown. He hated it. He reached out with his rough, scarred hands and cupped her face. He felt her tremble. You talk too much, Your Majesty, Jax whispered. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle storybook kiss. It was desperate. It was fueled by the anger of the betrayal, the fear of the war, and the relief of finally crashing into the one thing that felt solid in a world falling apart. Lyra made a sound in her throat, a small, desperate noise, and grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. Her crown tilted, nearly falling, but she didn't care. She kissed him back with a fierce hunger, trying to pour all the words she couldn't say into the contact. Jax's hands tangled in her hair, messing up the intricate royal braids. He held her like she was the only gravity in the room. For a moment, there was no palace, no council, no war, just the two of them, breaking every rule in the galaxy. They broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads resting against each other. Jax ran his thumb over her cheekbone, wiping away a tear. That, he said breathlessly, was treason. Lyra laughed, a breathless, giddy sound. I pardon you. She pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. Her expression turned serious. If we do this, Jax, if you stay, they will use it against us. Varenth will destroy you to get to me. It will not be safe. Jax smiled. It was the first real smile he had smiled since landing on Calith. I told you, he said, I do not like bullies. And I am already in deep. He kissed her forehead. Let them come. We will face them together. They moved to the balcony, standing in the shadows where the moonlight couldn't reach them, watching the fires of the lava plains dance below. Jax wrapped his arms around her from behind, and Lyra leaned back against him, the crown heavy on her head, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. They stayed there as the night deepened, pretending that the morning wouldn't come, but the morning did come, and it brought a sledgehammer. Jax woke up to the sound of screaming, not from Lyra. She was still asleep on the chaise lounge nearby, curled under his jacket, but from the holographic newsfeed terminal on the wall, it had activated remotely. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The room was bathed in the harsh red light of a priority alert. On the screen, a video was looping. It was grainy, taken from a distance by a stealth drone with a high zoom lens, but the image was unmistakable. It was Jax and Lyra on the balcony the night before. The angle was predatory. It showed them embracing. It showed the kiss. It showed the queen of the Draconari in the arms of a human mechanic. The headline scrolling beneath the image in jagged alien script was brutal. The queen's betrayal. Human infiltrator corrupts the throne. Lyra! Jax shouted. Lyra bolted awake, her hand going for a weapon that wasn't there. She looked at the screen, and her face went ashen. No, she whispered. No. The audio feed was a cacophony of pundits and politicians screaming, proof of her instability. Sleeping with the enemy while our borders burn. Must abdicate immediately for the safety of the Reach. The door to the quarters hissed open. It wasn't a servant. It was a squad of royal guards, weapons drawn. Behind them stood Lord Varenth, looking like the cat who had not only eaten the canary but had also inherited the canary's estate. Good morning, Varenth said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I trust you slept well. The rest of the planet, however, did not. Lyra stood up. She didn't have her armor. She was still in the rumpled gown, but she stood tall. You spied on me, she said, her voice shaking with rage. You put a drone outside my window. I monitored a security threat, Varenth corrected. And it appears my concerns were justified. You have compromised yourself. Lyraless. The footage is playing in every city from here to the outer rim. The people are rioting. They say you have sold out your own species for a human pet. He gestured to the screen, where footage showed crowds burning effigies of Lyra and Jax in the streets of the capital. The council is convening in 20 minutes. Varenth said, General Kalen is there. He is displeased. You have two choices. You announce your abdication and live out your days in exile with your human. Or you announce your engagement to the general. Claim this was a moment of weakness induced by human psychic weaponry. We can spin it, you see, and we execute the human to prove your loyalty. Jax stepped in front of Lyra. Over my dead body. Varenth looked at Jax with amusement. That is the general idea. Yes. Lyra put a hand on Jax's shoulder, gently pushing him back. She stepped forward to face Varenth. I will be at the council chamber, she said. Excellent, Varenth said. Do not keep us waiting. The war vote is first on the agenda. The walk to the council chamber was a march through a nightmare. The servants wouldn't look at them. The guards gripped their weapons tight. The air in the palace felt heavy, suffocating. Jax walked beside Lyra. He wanted to hold her hand, to comfort her, but he knew that right now, touching her would only add fuel to the fire. "What are you going to do?" Jax whispered. Lyra looked straight ahead. "I do not know, but I am done running." They entered the chamber. It was packed. Not just the 12 counselors, but hundreds of nobles, military officers, and media drones floating like vultures near the ceiling. As Lyra entered, a murmur of hostility swept through the room. On the central holographic display, the footage of the kiss was frozen, a towering monument to her shame. Lyra walked to the center of the room. Jax stood a few paces behind her, refusing to be separated from her by the guards. Lord Varanth stood at the podium. "Queen Lyralis," he boomed, his voice amplified for the broadcast. "You stand before this council accused of moral turpitude, endangerment of the realm, and fraternizing with a hostile species. How do you plead?" The room went silent. Every eye was on her. Lyra looked at the screen, at the image of her and Jax. She looked at the angry faces of the nobles. She looked at Varanth, who was smiling his victory. Then she turned and looked at Jax. He nodded, a small, barely visible motion. "I am here." Lyra turned back to the council. She raised her chin. She didn't look ashamed. She looked furious. "I plead guilty," Lyra said. Gasps rippled through the room. Varanth blinked, surprised by the easy victory. "Guilty," Lyra continued, her voice gaining strength, of being human enough to feel. "Guilty of trusting a man who saved my life when my own council plotted to end it." She pointed at the screen. "You put that image up there to shame me. You want me to apologize for finding comfort in the arms of someone who sees me, truly sees me, when all of you only see a stamp for your decrees." She took a step forward, her voice echoing off the crystal walls. "You speak of purity? You speak of dignity? While you smuggle weapons to kill our own people? While you plot wars for profit? You think a kiss is the scandal? The scandal is that I had to fly to a moon on the edge of nowhere to find an ounce of honor. And I found it in a human mechanic, not in this room of lords and ladies." She stood beside Jax, reaching out and taking his hand in front of the entire galaxy. "I will not marry your warlord," she said, her voice shaking with the force of her conviction. "I will not abdicate, and I will not apologize for needing to be seen as more than a crown. If that makes me unfit to rule, then perhaps the throne is not worth saving. But I will not let you burn this world down to warm your hands." She squeezed Jax's hand. "Now," she said, staring Varanth down, "show them the rest of the data. Show them who the real traitors are." Varanth's smile vanished. "Seize them!" he screamed. The doors burst open and soldiers flooded in. But they weren't royal guards. They wore the gray and red of Varanth's private militia. Jax grabbed a heavy ceremonial staff from a stunned counselor. "Here we go," Jax muttered, stepping in front of Lyra. The war had begun, not on the border, but right here in the throne room. The galaxy was loud, and for the first time in history, it was all screaming about a mechanic from a mining moon. In the days following Lyra's defiant stand in the council chamber, the Draconari capital of Calith became a pressure cooker. The airwaves were choked with vitriol. On one channel, a human news anchor with perfect teeth called Jax a Cinderella with a wrench, mocking the absurdity of a grease monkey in the royal court. On another, a Draconari traditionalist spat venom, labeling Lyra a traitor to her bloodline and Jax a corrosive biological agent sent to destabilize the throne. But beneath the hate, something else was stirring. In the mining colonies and the orbital slums, graffiti began to appear, a stylized image of a dragon shielding a human. People were tired of the war, tired of the endless hate, and in Lyra's refusal to apologize, they saw a spark of something dangerously human. Jax saw none of the romance. He only saw the targets on his back. He sat in the small safe house Lyra had secured within the palace grounds, a servant's annex that was technically off the official grid. He was sharpening a knife he had stolen from a guard, his movements rhythmic and angry. "You should leave," a voice said from the doorway. It was Kalen, the general of the Iron Wing, the warlord Lyra was supposed to marry. He was massive, his skin a deep, bruised indigo, his armor covered in the scars of 100 battles. He didn't look malicious. He looked pragmatic. "If you stay," the general said, his voice a low rumble, "Varenth will kill you. If he cannot kill you, he will kill her reputation until she is forced to execute you herself. Go back to your rock, human. Let the queens play their games." Jax didn't look up from the blade. "I am not a pet, General, and I do not run when things get complicated." "It is not about running," Kalen said, stepping closer. "It is about math. Your presence divides her support. If you disappear, the scandal dies. She survives." Jax stopped sharpening. He looked up, his eyes cold. "If I disappear, Varenth wins, and she marries you. Is that the math you are worried about?" Kalen held his gaze for a long moment, then snorted, a sound that might have been respect. "You are stubborn. It will get you killed. But I suppose she likes that about you." He turned and left, leaving Jax alone with the hum of the energy shield and the knowledge that every second he stayed, he was tightening the noose around Lyra's neck. Lyra entered an hour later. She looked exhausted. Her royal robes were gone, replaced by a simple dark tunic and trousers. She carried a bag over her shoulder. "We are leaving," she said. Jax stood up. "Leaving? Where?" "The spaceport is locked down." "Not off-world," Lyra said, tossing him a dark cloak. "Down, into the Undercity." "The Undercity?" Jax asked, catching the cloak. "You mean the place where people sell illegal dragon eggs and stab each other for credits?" "It is the only place Varenth's surveillance grid cannot see," Lyra said, pulling her hood up. "And it is the only place we can find the truth without being interrupted by an assassination attempt." They slipped out through a maintenance chute that Lyra remembered from her childhood explorations, a ventilation shaft that smelled of sulfur and old ozone. It dropped them miles below the floating palaces, down into the chaotic, neon-drenched heart of Calith's true populace. The Undercity was a sensory assault. It was a labyrinth of hanging markets, catwalks suspended over lava flows, and dragon hatcheries carved directly into the obsidian rock. The air was thick with smoke, spice, and the roar of engines. Here, the distinction between human and Draconari was blurred. Everyone was just trying to survive. Jax kept his head down, the hood obscuring his face. He felt exposed. Every shadow looked like an assassin. "Act natural," Lyra whispered, gripping his arm. "And for the love of the ancestors, do not speak unless you have to. Your accent sounds like a foghorn down here." "I do not have an accent," Jax muttered. "You are the one who sings when you talk." They navigated through a crowded bazaar. Stalls sold everything from unauthorized cybernetics to glowing fungi. Jax paused at a vendor's table, entranced by a small, iridescent scale hanging from a leather cord. It looked like a tool he had lost years ago, a multi-key for ignition ports. He picked it up, testing its weight. "How much for the opener?" he asked the vendor, a wizened Draconari with one eye. The vendor gasped, turning a shade of pale violet. "Opener? Opener! That is a scale from the Great Mother. It is a sacred fertility charm, you ignorant mammal." Jax dropped the scale as if it were hot. "Oh, right, fertility. My mistake." Lyra grabbed him by the collar and dragged him away before the vendor could summon a curse. "Fertility charm," Lyra hissed, though her lips were twitching with suppressed laughter. You just asked a priest for a bottle opener for his god. It looked practical. Jax defended himself. Later, they stopped at a food stall. Jax, trying to be polite to the server, attempted a phrase Lyra had taught him. "Shakal more," he said, nodding solemnly. The server, a massive Draconari with tusks, stared at him in horror. Then he burst out laughing, slamming a bowl of steaming noodles onto the counter. "Your mother smells like moss, too." "Little human!" the server roared, slapping Jax on the back hard enough to rattle his teeth. Jax looked at Lyra. "I said good evening, didn't I?" Lyra was laughing so hard she had to lean against a support pillar. "You missed the tonal inflection on the second syllable. You essentially insulted his matriarch's hygiene, but down here that is a form of endearment. You made a friend." Jax ate his noodles in silence, deciding that silence was safer than linguistics. They found their contact in a data den, a shadowy cavern filled with humming server banks and cooling fans that spun lazily in the humid air. Rix was a retired dragon rider who had lost his legs in the last war and replaced them with cybernetic struts. He sat in a floating chair, surrounded by holographic displays. "So," Rix said, looking from Lyra to Jax, "the Queen and the mechanic, you two are interrupting my soaps. We need help." "Rix," Lyra said, dropping the pretense, "we need to trace the leak. The drone footage." Rix spun his chair around. "Everyone wants to trace the leak. Varanth, the media, my grandmother. Why should I help you? You are the crown. The crown took my legs and gave me a medal I cannot eat. Because the crown is trying to stop a war that will take your nephew's legs too," Jax said, stepping forward. Rix looked at Jax. He studied the soldier's stance, the scarred hands. "You are the human," Rix said, "the one they say corrupted her. You look tired." "I am tired," Jax admitted. "And I am angry." Rix grunted. "Anger is useful. Sit down." For the next 6 hours they worked. They were joined by a human hacker named Silas, a nervous kid who tapped on a keyboard like he was playing a piano, and a smuggler named Vara who had refused the weapon shipments on moral grounds. It was a strange, ragtag council of war. Lyra, the queen, sat on a crate, decoding encrypted files. Jax, the mechanic, rewired a fried server block to boost their processing power. The intimacy of it hit them both. There were no guards here, no protocols, just the hum of machinery and the shared purpose of survival. "Look at this," Silas said, pulling up a complex web of data streams. "The drone that took the footage." It wasn't a palace security bot. Its signal originated from a private corporate satellite. "Keeler," Vara said, spitting on the floor, "the director of Chimera Corp. He is Varanth's human partner." Rix tapped a screen. "And look at the timestamp on the upload. It was queued 3 days before the event happened." Jax frowned. "That is impossible. They couldn't have footage of us kissing before we kissed." They didn't need the footage, Lyra realized, her voice cold. They had the narrative ready. Queen compromised. They just needed an image to fit the headline. If it wasn't you, Jax, they would have fabricated something else, or framed you for something worse. "It is an algorithm," Silas said. "They are using an AI network to manipulate public anger. It scans social sentiment and releases leaks, fake or real, to maximize outrage. They are steering the population toward war like a herd of cattle." Lyra looked at the screen, at the mathematical precision of the hate that was tearing her kingdom apart. It wasn't political disagreement, it was engineering. "We have to kill the signal," Jax said. "No," Lyra said, "we have to hijack it." That night, they rested in an abandoned dragon perch high in the Undercity's ceiling. It was a hollowed-out alcove that overlooked the neon river of the market below. Lyra sat near the edge, her legs dangling over the drop. Jax sat beside her. They shared a bottle of cheap synthetic wine Rix had given them. "You were good back there," Jax said quietly. "With the team. You listened to them." "I am used to listening to advisors," Lyra said. "No," Jax corrected. "You listen to people. There is a difference." Lyra took a sip of the wine. It burned, but it felt grounding. "I never wanted this, Jax," she whispered. "The crown. I was the third in line. My brothers died in the plague. I was the spare, the one who liked to fly storm scouts and read history books." She looked at her hands. "I feel like a fraud. Every time I sit on that throne, I feel like a child wearing her mother's shoes. Varanth knows it. That is why he can manipulate me. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am not strong enough." Jax set the bottle down. He turned to her, his expression fierce. "Stop that!" Lyra blinked. "Stop what? Stop apologizing for being human. You think strength is what Varanth has? That cold, calculating cruelty? That is not strength, Lyra. That is fear dressed up in armor." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the delicate bones of her wrist. "I have seen strong men," Jax said, "men who could lift a hovercar. I watched them break the first time the shooting started. And I have seen you. I saw you fly a dragon through an ion storm with a bleeding wing. I saw you stand in front of a council of sharks and tell them to go to hell." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a murmur. "You are not a fraud. Lyra, you are terrified. Good. That means you are paying attention. Leadership is not about not being afraid. It is about being honest about the fear and moving anyway." Lyra looked at him. The neon lights from below cast chaotic shadows on his face, highlighting the scars and the stubble. He looked rough, worn, and beautiful. She reached up and touched his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, the roughness of his skin. "How did a mechanic get so wise?" she asked, a small smile touching her lips. "I listened to my toolbox," Jax said, smiling back. "He has very strong opinions on leadership." They fell silent. The noise of the city below faded into a dull roar. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the same magnetic pull that had drawn them together in the canyon. But this time, there was no hesitation, no pulling away. Lyra leaned in. Jax met her halfway. The kiss was slow. It wasn't the frantic, angry collision of the guest quarters. It was aching. It was a conversation without words. It tasted of cheap wine and desperation and a promise that neither of them knew if they could keep. Lyra clung to him, her hands gripping his jacket as if he were the only solid thing in a world of smoke. Jax wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, burying his face in the curve of her neck. "I am not leaving," Jax whispered against her skin. "I know," she breathed. "Even if the whole galaxy points guns at us," he vowed, "I am right here." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the dark, two outcasts on the edge of a cliff, gathering their strength for the fall. The next morning, the Undercity woke up to a different kind of explosion. Silas and Rix had done it. They had used the smugglers' relay network to blast the evidence of the conspiracy onto every screen in Calith. It wasn't a subtle leak. It was a flood. Hollow screens in the markets, personal data pads, even the massive advertising billboards in the upper city suddenly flickered and replaced their content with the decrypted files. Audio of Varanth ordering the false flag attacks played on loop. Emails between Keeler and the council detailing the manufactured outrage scrolled for all to see. The reaction was instantaneous. The riots that Varanth had engineered stopped. Confusion rippled through the populace. Then, a new kind of anger took hold. People weren't angry at the humans anymore. They were angry at being played, but the conspirators didn't fold. They panicked. In the safe house, alarms began to blare. "They are cutting the grid," Rick shouted, his fingers flying across his console. "They are shutting down the planetary net." On the screens, the feed cut to static. Then, a new message appeared. It was the seal of the Emergency Council. Alert. Treason detected. Martial law in effect. "They are moving to a coup," Lyra said, standing up. "Varanth is going to claim the evidence is a fabrication by human terrorists. He will arrest anyone who questions him." "We have to go," Jack said, grabbing his gear. "If they track that signal back here, we are dead." They scrambled out of the den just as heavy footsteps echoed on the catwalks above. Varanth's private militia was sweeping the Undercity. They ducked into a side alley, pressing against the damp stone as a squad of soldiers marched past. "We cannot hide," Lyra whispered. "If we hide, he controls the narrative. He will spin this until the truth is buried." "Then we need a bigger microphone," Jack said. Lyra looked up, through the gloom of the Undercity, past the layers of rock and metal. She could sense the presence of something massive. "The Dragon Tower," she said. "The central beacon. It has a direct hardline to the orbital satellites. It cannot be jammed by the local grid. It is a fortress." "Lyra," Jax warned, "it is the most heavily guarded structure on the planet. And it is the only way to end this," she said. "If I can get to the broadcast chamber, I can speak to the people directly. Live, unfiltered." Jax looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. It wasn't the fire of a queen protecting her crown. It was the fire of a woman protecting her home. He checked the charge on his stolen stun baton. "Okay," Jax said. "We break into the impenetrable fortress, hijack the galaxy's biggest radio, and try not to get eaten by guard dragons." "Sounds like a Tuesday," Lyra said, a grim smile on her face. They began the climb. It was a grueling ascent through the ventilation shafts and maintenance ladders that connected the Undercity to the spires above. When they finally emerged onto a lower landing pad, the sky was chaos. Loyalist dragons were battling Varanth's forces in the clouds. The air was filled with the screech of energy weapons and the roar of beasts. The storm that Varanth had tried to weaponize was now reflecting the turmoil of the city itself. Lyra whistled, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the noise. A moment later, a massive shape dove from the clouds. Ethan. The dragon landed heavily, his scales scarred but glowing with fierce blue light. He nudged Lyra with his snout, rumbling a greeting that vibrated the deck. "You found him," Jack said, impressed. "He found me," Lyra said, swinging into the saddle. "He always does." She extended her hand to Jax. "Ready to fly, mechanic?" Jax looked at the hand. He looked at the chaos above. He thought about the quiet life he had left behind on Varanth, the safe, boring life of fixing rusted ships. He took her hand. "Only if you promise not to drop me this time." Lyra pulled him up. She leaned back, her forehead resting against his for a brief, tender second. "I promise," she whispered. She kicked Ethan's flanks. The dragon roared and launched into the sky, carrying the queen and her mechanic straight into the heart of the storm. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. But for the first time, they were flying toward the same horizon. The sky over Calith was no longer golden. It was a churning cauldron of violet and black, whipped into a fury by the weather control satellites Varanth had seized. Lightning, thick as tree trunks and unnaturally precise, slammed into the spires of the city, herding the populace indoors and clearing the airspace for the coup. Except for one dragon. Ethan dove through the storm, a streak of blue bioluminescence against the dark clouds. Lyra was hunched low over his neck, her hands woven into the neural interface of the saddle, behind her. Jax gripped the secondary harness, his eyes scanning the chaos through a pair of high-contrast tactical goggles. "Hold on!" Lyra shouted, her voice torn away by the wind. They have locked onto us. Ahead of them, the dragon tower rose like a spear of black glass, piercing the heart of the storm. But the path was blocked, a swarm of drones, the same corporate killbots they had fought on Vereth, buzzed around the tower like angry wasps. And behind them, 3 massive dragons ridden by Vereth's elite guard were banking to intercept. "Jax, I need that interface," Lyra yelled. "I am working on it," Jax shouted back. He was jacked into the dragon's harness with his datapad, his fingers flying across the screen. The bioarmor on Ethan wasn't just protection, it was a circuit. Jax was rewriting the targeting algorithms in real time, syncing the dragon's natural reflexes with the stolen corporate codes he had cracked in the Undercity. "Got it!" Jax yelled. "Override engaged." A swarm of drones dove toward them, firing red plasma bursts. Lyra didn't flinch. "Brake left. Ethan!" The dragon rolled, spinning so fast the world blurred. As he spun, the biocannons mounted on his harness, weapons Jax had reactivated, locked onto the drones with terrifying speed. Blue energy bolts sizzled through the rain, punching through the drones' shields. 3 explosions blossomed in the sky, orange fire swallowed instantly by the wind. But the enemy dragons were closing in. A red leviathan, twice the size of Ethan, opened its maw and unleashed a torrent of chemical fire. Jax saw the heat bloom on his thermal display. "Dive!" he screamed. Lyra pushed Ethan into a vertical drop. They plummeted toward the lava plains, the fire streaking harmlessly over their heads. The G-force pressed Jax into the saddle, his vision graying at the edges. "Pull up," Jax grunted. "We are going to hit the spires." Lyra hauled back on the reins. Ethan's wings snapped open, catching the dense air. They skimmed the tops of the lower towers, close enough to shatter windows with their wake. "We cannot fight them all," Lyra yelled. "We have to get inside the tower, the balcony." Jax pointed upward. "There is a diplomatic landing pad halfway up. If we can punch through the perimeter, we can breach the airlock. It is suicide." Lyra laughed, a wild, exhilarating sound. "Let's do it." She pulled Ethan into a corkscrew climb, weaving through the lightning strikes. The automated turrets on the tower face swiveled to track them. "Jax, jam the turrets! I am trying!" Jax yelled, tapping furiously. "Their encryption is changing every second." He abandoned the brute force hack and tried something stupider. He fed the turret sensors a false positive, a command that identified Ethan as a falling piece of debris rather than a target. The turrets paused, their targeting lasers flickering. "That is our window!" Lyra shouted. Ethan flared his wings, slamming onto the balcony with a bone-jarring impact. Stone cracked under his claws. The dragon roared, swinging his tail to smash a drone that had followed them. "Go!" Jax yelled, unbuckling his harness. Lyra slid off, her energy blade igniting with a hiss. "I will clear the path to the beacon." Jax didn't follow her. He turned back to the dragon. "Man, what are you doing?" Lyra screamed, pausing at the airlock door. "I have to hold them off," Jax shouted, pointing at the sky. Vereth's dragons were circling back for another pass. "If they land, they will flank you. Go!" Lyra looked at him, agony in her eyes. She wanted to stay. She wanted to fight beside him, but she knew he was right. "Do not die, mechanic," she ordered, her voice breaking. "I have a union break at 5. I plan to be there." Jax grinned, though his hands were shaking. Lyra turned and sliced through the airlock mechanism. The doors hissed open, and she vanished inside. Jax turned to face the sky. Ethan snarled, his blue scales pulsing with agitation. "Okay, big guy," Jax said, patting the dragon's flank. "Just you and me? Let's make some noise." The red dragon dove, its rider leveling a lance charged with disruption energy. Jax scrambled behind the cover of a stone pillar, using his datapad to remote trigger Ethan's breath weapon. A bolt of blue lightning erupted from the dragon's maw, catching the enemy rider in the shoulder, but there were too many of them. Another dragon landed on the far side of the balcony, shaking the structure. Heavy plasma fire chewed up the stone around Jax. He was pinned. If he stayed here, he was dead. And if he died, Ethan would be overwhelmed, and Lyra would be trapped. He looked over the railing, 50 feet down. A maintenance gantry jutted out from the tower's spine. It led directly to the reactor core cooling vents. Jax looked at Ethan. "Drop me!" Jax yelled at the dragon. Ethan blinked, confused. "Grab me and drop me, now!" The dragon understood. Ethan lunged, grabbing Jax by the back of his flight suit with massive jaws. He swung his head over the edge and released. Jax fell. For a second, there was nothing but wind and the terrifying drop to the city below. Then, he slammed into the metal grating of the gantry. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He rolled, sliding toward the edge. His fingers scrambled for purchase on the wet metal. He caught a beam, his legs dangling over thousands of feet of empty air. Jax laughed. It was a hysterical, breathless sound. "I hate this planet," he wheezed. He hauled himself up, his muscles screaming. He dragged himself toward the maintenance hatch, pulling a laser cutter from his belt. He sliced the lock and tumbled into the dark, humid guts of the tower. Lyra was a storm in human form. She moved through the corridors of the Dragon Tower with a lethal grace. She didn't want to kill, these were her people, soldiers obeying orders, but she wouldn't let them stop her. She used the flat of her blade, the heel of her boot, and the ancient martial forms of the Royal Guard to disarm and disable. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice echoing with the royal voice, a tone of absolute authority taught to queens for centuries. Some guards hesitated, their loyalty warring with their orders. Lyra swept past them, but the elite guard, Varenth's personal zealots, did not hesitate. They opened fire. Lyra deflected the bolts with her energy blade, closing the distance. She fought with a desperate ferocity. She wasn't fighting for a throne anymore. She was fighting for the man hanging off the side of the tower. She was fighting for the right to choose her own life. She breached the final door to the beacon chamber. It was a vast circular room dominated by a column of pure light, the central broadcast core. And standing in front of the console, bathed in the glow of the data streams, was Lord Varenth. "You are persistent. Lyralis," Varenth said, not turning around. "I will give you that." Lyra stepped into the room, her blade humming. "It is over, Varenth. The people know the truth. The riots have stopped." Varenth turned. He held a heavy ornate energy sword. His face was twisted into a mask of calm fanaticism. "The people know what I tell them to know," he said. "The truth is a fluid concept." He gestured to the console. "I have reconfigured the beacon. In 3 minutes, it will not just broadcast a signal. It will transmit a focused high-energy burst. I can target the human settlements on the moon. I can burn them to ash. And I will blame it on a human terrorist attack." "You are insane," Lyra whispered. "You would kill millions to save billions?" Varenth shrugged. "It is a necessary calculus, but it does not have to happen." He took a step toward her. "Renounce him. Lyra, renounce the human. Marry Kalen. Submit to the council. If you do, I will power down the weapon. You can keep your crown. You can keep your life. All it costs is your pride." Lyra looked at him. She thought of Jax, laughing in the face of danger. She thought of the way he looked at her scars. She thought of the freedom she had felt in the Undercity. A crown built on lies is not a crown, Lyra said, raising her blade. It is a collar. And I am done wearing it. Varenth sighed. A pity. I was hoping to avoid staining the carpet. He lunged, deep in the reactor level. Jax was fighting a different kind of battle. He was inside the service crawl space, surrounded by humming conduits and searing heat. He was jacked into the primary junction box, sweat stinging his eyes. The AI system, the one Varenth was using to control the beacon, was fighting him. It was sophisticated, layered with military-grade ice. "Come on, you piece of junk," Jax muttered, his fingers cramping. "Talk to me." He bypassed the security protocols using a backdoor code he had learned from Rix in the Undercity. He found the core logic file. It was suppressed, shackled by thousands of override commands. The AI wasn't evil. It was lobotomized. Jax began to cut the digital chains. He rewrote the permissions, stripping away Varenth's admin access. "Wake up," Jax typed. "System reboot. Authorization. Maintenance override 001. The screen flashed green. System restored. Peacekeeping protocols online. "Yes," Jax shouted. He typed a new command. "Connect audio-video feed to external broadcast. Source, beacon chamber. Priority, Alpha, in the beacon chamber." The air crackled with the sound of clashing energy blades. Lyra and Varenth moved in a blur of light. Varenth was stronger, his blows heavy and brutal. But Lyra was faster. She danced around him, parrying, looking for an opening. Sparks rained down as their blades locked. "You are weak," Varenth spat, pushing her back toward the edge of the platform. "You let your heart make you soft." Lyra dug her heels in. "My heart makes me real." She twisted her blade, disengaging and spinning inside his guard. She slammed the hilt of her sword into his ribs. Varenth grunted, stumbling back, but he recovered instantly, swinging a backhand blow that caught Lyra in the chest. Her armor absorbed the impact, but the force threw her across the room. She slammed into the console, gasping for breath. Varenth advanced, raising his sword for the killing strike. "It is time to end this experiment," he said. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber shifted from angry red to a calm, blinding white. The console behind Lyra hummed to life. "Broadcast active," a mechanical voice announced. "Live feed to all sectors." Varenth froze. He looked up. The walls of the chamber, which had been opaque, suddenly turned transparent, and on every screen in the city below, on every datapad in the galaxy, the image of the beacon chamber appeared. "What have you done?" Varenth hissed. Lyra pulled herself up, using the console for support. She looked directly into the camera lens. She was bruised, bleeding, and exhausted. She looked magnificent. She didn't speak to Varenth. She spoke to the galaxy. "My name is Lyralis," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I am your queen, and I have lied to you." She took a breath. "I went to the frontier in disguise because I was afraid. I was afraid of the war. I was afraid of this council. But mostly I was afraid of being alone." Varenth lunged for the kill switch, but the console locked him out. "I found a human," Lyra continued, her eyes filling with tears. "His name is Jax. He is a mechanic. He has scars on his hands and oil on his face. And I love him." The silence in the galaxy was absolute. "I love him not because he is human," she said, "but because he taught me that honor has no species. He taught me that true strength is not in purity or conquest. It is in choosing connection even when it terrifies you." She looked at Varenth, who was staring at her in horror as his power evaporated in real time. "There is no human invasion," Lyra said. "There is only a group of frightened men who profit from your fear. They want you to hate so they can rule. She stepped away from the console, standing tall. I reject that rule. I reject the hate. If we are to survive, we must be brave enough to be more than what they tell us we are. Varenth let out a scream of pure, impotent rage. He realized it was over. The coup was dead. His narrative was shattered. If I cannot rule it, he shrieked, no one will. He slammed his fist onto the manual override for the weapon. The beacon flared, energy building for a discharge that would vaporize the city below. Lyra dove for him, but he backhanded her again, sending her skidding across the floor. Burn! Varenth screamed. Burn it all! The door to the maintenance hatch exploded inward. Jax burst into the room. He was covered in soot, bleeding from a cut on his forehead and looking like the wrath of a very angry god. Hey! Jax yelled. Varenth turned. Jax didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. He lowered his shoulder and tackled Varenth with the force of a freight train. They slammed into the console, shattering the interface. The energy buildup dissipated, venting harmlessly into the sky in a spectacular aurora of multicolored light. The momentum carried them both over the console and toward the shattered window where the drone had crashed earlier. They went over the edge. Jax! Lyra screamed. She scrambled across the floor, throwing herself toward the opening. Jax was hanging by one hand from a jagged piece of reinforcement bar, his feet dangling over the abyss. Varenth had fallen, his scream fading into the distance as he plummeted toward the city he had tried to destroy. Jax looked up. His grip was slipping. The metal was wet with rain. Lyra reached out. Grab my hand, she screamed. Jax looked at her. He smiled, a weak, tired smile. You are going to fall, he rasped. Let go. Lyra, never, she sobbed. She lunged, grabbing his wrist with both hands. The weight jerked her forward, dragging her chest over the sharp edge of the broken glass. She cried out in pain, but she didn't let go. She looked into his eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her in the skyport and seen a person, not a queen. I got you, she whispered, her voice fierce. I have got you. She hauled him up. It took every ounce of strength she had, every bit of Draconari muscle and leverage. She dragged him over the edge and onto the floor of the chamber. They collapsed together in a heap of tangled limbs and heavy breathing. Outside, the storm was breaking. The unnatural lightning faded, replaced by the soft, golden light of a natural dawn. The dragons of the city were roaring, not in anger, but in a chaotic, deafening chorus of hope. Jax rolled onto his back, staring up at the ceiling. He was alive. He looked at Lyra. She was lying beside him, staring at him. You came back, she whispered. I told you, Jax wheezed, clutching his rib. I had a union break. Lyra laughed. It started as a giggle and turned into a sob. She buried her face in his chest, holding onto him as if he were the only solid thing in the universe. Jax wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her head. He looked at the console, where messages were scrolling by the thousands. We hear you. Stand with the Queen. Humanity stands with Lyra. There was hate. Yes, there would always be hate. But overwhelming it, drowning it out, was a wave of cautious, fragile hope. We did it, Jax whispered. Lyra lifted her head. She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. We did, she said. Now, mechanic. How do you feel about rebuilding a kingdom? Jax groaned. Do I get overtime? Lyra smiled. We can negotiate. She stood up and pulled him to his feet. Together. They walked to the window and looked out at the city, a city that was scarred, broken, but finally, beautifully free. The silence that followed the fall of Lord Varenth was louder than the storm had ever been. For days, the capital city of Calith existed in a state of suspended animation, a breath held between the chaos of the coup and the uncertainty of what came next. The cleanup was not just physical, though there was plenty of that. drones sweeping debris from the lava plains, repair crews welding the scars on the Dragon Tower, but political. The conspiracy unraveled with terrifying speed. With Varanth dead and the central AI broadcasting the truth, the shadows had nowhere left to hide. Corporate Director Keeler was arrested in his orbital penthouse attempting to shred 3 terabytes of incriminating data. He was dragged out in handcuffs by a mixed squad of Draconari royal guards and human colonial marshals, a visual metaphor that played on every news feed in the galaxy. Lyra did not rest. She could not afford to. She sat at the head of the Emergency Council, a body she had convened not to rule but to investigate. The Great Hall, usually a place of whispered schemes, was now stripped bare, filled with bright lights and endless testimony. Lyra subjected herself to the same scrutiny as her ministers. She stood before the assembly for 10 hours a day, answering questions about her disappearance, her unauthorized flight to Vareth, and the security breaches that had allowed Varanth to nearly incinerate a city. She did not defend her right to rule. She defended the necessity of changing how that rule functioned. We built a system that relied on silence, Lyra told the inquiry, her voice hoarse but steady. We trusted in the purity of bloodlines and the wisdom of the shadows. We were wrong. Power that hides is power that rots. If we are to prevent another Varanth, we must tear down the walls that allowed him to grow in the dark. Jax watched her from the balcony of the gallery. He was no longer a prisoner, but he wasn't quite a guest either. He was an anomaly. The human who saved the queen. The mechanic who tackled a warlord off a tower. He felt like a ghost haunting a palace he had helped save. On the 5th day, a diplomat approached him. It was not General Kalen, but a smooth-faced functionary from the human colonial authority, a man named Henderson who smelled of expensive soap and compromise. "Mr. Jax," Henderson said, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We have arranged transport for you. A private shuttle leaves for the Sol sector in 12 hours. Jax leaned against the marble railing, looking down at the council floor where Lyra was arguing about trade tariffs. "Is that so?" "It is for the best," Henderson said, sliding a credit chip across the railing. "There is a substantial pension included, enough to buy your own garage, maybe even a small shipyard. The Crown is grateful, obviously, but complicated." Jax looked at the chip. It represented more money than he had made in a lifetime of busting his knuckles on ion drives. It was freedom. It was safety. The Queen has a difficult path ahead. Henderson continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She needs to rebuild stability. Having a human attachment lingering in the palace creates unnecessary friction. It gives her enemies ammunition. The kindest thing you can do for her, Mr. Jax, is to let the Queen handle Queen matters." Jax picked up the chip. He turned it over in his fingers, and it felt light, insignificant. He looked down at Lyra. She must have sensed his gaze because she looked up, breaking protocol to scan the balcony. Her eyes found him instantly. Even from this distance, he saw the exhaustion in her posture, the weight of the crown pressing down on her. Henderson smiled, thinking the deal was done. 12 hours, Jax said. He slipped the chip into his pocket and walked away without shaking the man's hand. That night, Lyra found him in the royal gardens. It was a sanctuary of bioluminescent flora, where trees wept glowing sap and the flowers hummed with soft, melodic energy. Jax was sitting on a stone bench, staring at a fountain that defied gravity, water spiraling upward into a floating orb. He didn't turn when she approached. He knew her step. He knew the rhythm of her breathing. "They offered you a way out," Lyra said softly. Jax nodded. "Henderson. Nice suit. Heavy wallet? He says I am bad for your poll numbers." Lyra walked around the bench and sat beside him. She wasn't wearing her robes of state. She was wearing a simple silk tunic, her feet bare on the mossy grass. She looked small, vulnerable in a way she never allowed herself to be inside the tower. "He is right," she said. Jax looked at her, his brows knitting together. "Excuse me? If you stay," Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly, "you will never be safe. Half the galaxy thinks you are a hero, but the other half thinks you are a parasite who seduced a queen to gain influence. You will be watched. You will be judged. Every mistake I make will be blamed on you." She reached out, her hand hovering over his arm before pulling back, as if she were afraid to touch him. "I cannot ask you to live like that, Jax. You are a mechanic. You fix things. If you stay here, you will be in a place where nothing is ever truly fixed, only managed. You deserve peace. You deserve to go home." Jax listened to the fountain gurgle. He thought about his workshop on Vareth, the smell of grease, the quiet hum of the ventilation fans. It was a simple life. It was a safe life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the credit chip Henderson had given him. He held it up, the small rectangle catching the light of the glowing trees. "It is a lot of money," Jax said. Lyra looked away, a tear tracing a silver line down her cheek. "Take it, Jax, please, before I become selfish enough to ask you to stay." Jax flicked his wrist. The chip spun through the air, arcing over the water, and landed with a soft plop in the center of the fountain. Lyra stared at the ripples. "What are you doing?" "I do not know how to go back," Jax said quietly. He turned to face her, shifting on the bench so their knees touched. "I tried to picture it, sitting in my shop, arguing with Kit, fixing thrusters on ore haulers. It used to be enough. It used to be everything. But now..." He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred. "Now I know what it feels like to fly through a storm on the back of a dragon. I know what it feels like to hold a line against an army because the person behind me is worth dying for." He looked up, locking eyes with her. "My heart is not in a garage anymore. Lyra, it is on the back of a dragon, and it is right here, in this garden, looking at you." Lyra let out a shuddering breath. "But the cost, Jax, they will tear you apart. Let them try," Jax said, a dangerous, familiar grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I have tackled a warlord off a skyscraper. I think I can handle a few snobby diplomats." He took her hands in his. "I am not your subject, Lyra, and I am not your secret. If we do this, we do it my way. No hiding, no apologizing. We are two stubborn people who refuse to let fear decide for us." Lyra looked at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. She found only the same rock-solid certainty that had pulled her back from the ledge at the skyport. "Okay," she whispered. "Your way." The reforms Lyra proposed 3 weeks later shook the foundations of the Draconari Reach. She didn't just invite humans to the table, she built a new table. She announced the formation of the Accord Council, a governing body comprised equally of Draconari nobles and human colonial representatives. It was a bureaucratic nightmare to organize, but it forced the two species to look each other in the eye rather than down the barrel of a plasma rifle. But her most radical move was the Open Sky Initiative. Standing on the landing deck of the Dragon Tower, Lyra signed the decree that opened the Dragon hatcheries to human pilots. It was a symbolic shattering of the oldest Draconari taboo, the idea that only those with violet blood could bond with the great beasts. "The dragons do not care about blood," Lyra told the press, her voice amplified across the plaza. "They care about spirit. They care about the courage to fall and the trust to be caught." And then, she announced the ceremony. It wasn't a wedding. The ancient Draconari wedding rites were obsessed with lineage and genetic purity, involving bloodletting and solemn chants about duty. Lyra threw the scroll containing those rites into the fireplace. "We are not merging bloodlines," she told the shocked high priest. "We are merging lives." The ceremony took place at high noon on the Grand Eyrie. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue, scrubbed clean of the storms that had plagued the city for so long. The crowd was a kaleidoscope. Draconari nobles in their shimmering silks stood shoulder to shoulder with human miners in dress uniforms. Soldiers from the Iron Wing stood at attention next to corporate security officers who looked uncomfortable but hopeful. Thousands of dragons circled the spire, a living cyclone of scales and fire that cast dancing shadows over the assembly. Lyra stood at the center of the platform. She wore no crown. Her hair was loose, blowing in the wind, and she wore a simple gown of white and gold, colors that signified a new dawn in Draconari culture. Jax walked toward her. He wasn't wearing royal robes. He wore a tailored flight suit, clean and sharp, but unmistakably utilitarian. He looked like what he was, a man ready to work. A hush fell over the crowd. Lyra took a step forward, raising her voice so it carried without the need for amplifiers. "Citizens of the Reach," she began. "You have asked me why I chose a human. You have whispered that it was a political maneuver, or a madness born of stress." She looked at Jax, her eyes softening. "I did not choose a consort for his bloodline. I did not choose a partner for his political utility." She reached out and took Jax's hand. "I chose this man because when I was falling, he caught me. I chose him because when I was hiding behind a mask of duty, he saw the woman underneath and demanded she show herself. I present to you not a prince but a partner, the man who taught your queen to listen, to laugh, and to love courage more than comfort." She turned to Jax. "Jax of Virith, do you promise to stand beside me? Not behind me in my shadow and not in front of me as a shield, but beside me." Jax squeezed her hand. His voice was steady, carrying the rough cadence of the frontier. "I promise," Jax said. "I promise to fix what breaks. Even if it is your patience. I promise to challenge you when you hide behind your duty and remind you that you are allowed to be a person. I promise to never let you fly through a storm alone again." A ripple of laughter and murmurs went through the crowd. It was so unscripted, so raw. Lyra smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "And I, Lyraless, promise to protect your right to stand as my equal. I promise that my power will never be a wall between us. I promise to trust you with my life, my heart, and the safety of my sky." There was no priest to declare them bound. There was no exchange of rings. Jax leaned in, cupping her face with his hands, the same gesture he had used in the guest quarters, the same gesture he had used on the tower. "Make it count. Mechanic," Lyra whispered. He kissed her. It wasn't a polite royal peck. It was deep and tender, a claim made in the face of history. It was a kiss that said they were done hiding. The crowd erupted. It started with the humans, a roar of approval, and then the Draconari joined in, swept up in the undeniable power of the moment. Above them, Ethan roared, a sound like thunder, and the thousands of dragons in the sky answered, a symphony of joy that shook the very stones of the tower. Jax pulled back, breathless, resting his forehead against hers. "I think they like us," he said. Lyra looked out at the cheering crowd, at the dragons weaving through the clouds, at the world that was terrified and hopeful and new. "Let's give them something to look at," she said. 6 months later, the wind on Virith was still screaming, but it didn't sound angry anymore. It sounded like home. The Black Ridge skyport had changed. The rusted skeleton was gone, replaced by a reinforced structure of gleaming steel and dragon glass. The landing pads were expanded, and the banners snapping in the wind bore the crest of the Accord, a human hand clasping a dragon's claw. A massive silver-blue dragon descended from the clouds, its movements lazy and confident. Ethan landed on Pad 1 with a grace that belied his size, his bioluminescent scales pulsing a contented blue. Jax hopped down from the saddle, his boots hitting the familiar deck plates. He took a deep breath of the ozone-rich air. "Still smells like sulfur and bad coffee," he noted. Lyra slid down beside him, brushing dust from her riding leathers. "It smells like history," she corrected, looping her arm through his. They walked toward the main hangar bay. Inside, it was a hive of activity. Human mechanics were teaching young Draconari pilots how to calibrate thrusters, while dragon handlers showed human apprentices how to check for scale rot. A bright orange box rolled toward them at high speed. "Finally," the mechanical voice screeched. "Do you have any idea how disorganized these organics are?" "Hello?" "Kit," Jax grinned. "Miss me? I have processed 3,000 distinct emotions regarding your absence." Kit whirred, mostly relief. "But the inventory is a disaster. These dragon riders keep leaving bioslurry on my pristine floors. I demand a promotion, and a raise, and legs. I want legs." "Jax." Lyra laughed, the sound echoing off the high ceiling. "We can discuss the legs," Lyra said. "But how about your own workshop? We are building a dedicated AI integration center in the lower levels. You would be the director." Kit paused. His sensor eye blinked rapidly. "Director Kit. It has an acceptable phonetic resonance. Very well, I accept. But I am still filing a grievance about the slurry." He rolled away, barking orders at a terrified teenage mechanic. Jax shook his head. "You are spoiling him. He is going to be insufferable." "He is family," Lyra said simply. They walked through the hangar and out onto the balcony, the same balcony where Lyra had stood months ago, watching the lightning and feeling alone. The view was the same, the jagged black mountains, the electric green clouds. But the feeling was entirely different. Lyra leaned against the railing, looking down at the valley where dragons were nesting in the mist. "You know," she said softly, "when I first crashed here, I was looking for something specific." "Spare parts?" Jax asked. "Proof," she said. "I was looking for proof that love was possible for someone like me. Or I was looking for confirmation that it wasn't, that I should just give up, marry the warlord, and be the statue they wanted me to be." She turned to him, her golden eyes reflecting the sunset nebula. "I didn't think I would find it in a mechanic with a bad attitude and a hero complex." Jax smiled, wrapping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. "I wasn't looking for love at all," he admitted. "I was just doing my job. I saw someone fall." "Lyra, I couldn't just watch you hit the ground." He kissed her temple. The fact that the someone turned out to be a dragon-riding alien queen. Well, that is just overachieving destiny. Lyra rested her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy, Jax? Truly?" Jax looked out at the horizon. He thought about the council meetings, the diplomatic dinners, the endless pressure. It was hard work. It was dangerous work. But then he felt Lyra's warmth against his side. He heard the roar of Ethan in the distance. He saw the way the humans and Draconari in the hangar below were laughing together. He realized he hadn't just fixed a ship. He had helped fix a world. "I am home," Jax said. Ethan appeared, hovering near the balcony, waiting. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent purples and soft golds, the colors of a bruise healing. "One last flight before dinner?" Lyra challenged, her eyes sparking with that old competitive fire. Jax vaulted over the railing and onto the saddle. "Try to keep up, Your Majesty." Lyra laughed and swung up behind him. They launched into the air, soaring upward into the nebula. Their hands were intertwined on the reins, guiding the dragon together. The storm clouds that had once symbolized war were still there, but they were no longer a barrier. They were just scenery. Power without love becomes cruelty, Jax thought as the wind rushed past his face. He had seen enough of that to last a lifetime. But love without courage collapses under pressure. They had chosen the harder path. They had chosen to love across boundaries, to face the danger instead of hiding from it. And as they disappeared into the brilliant light of the nebula, leaving a trail of blue fire in their wake, it was clear to anyone watching that they had succeeded. They were building a galaxy where both crown and commoner were allowed to be fully, imperfectly human, or Draconari, or, as they were proving with every beat of the dragon's wings, something entirely new.